The first sound was not a shout or a drum. It was a low, faraway tapping that seemed to come from under the sand itself. The team standing at the edge of the Sphinx enclosure looked at each other in the hot sunlight. Their instruments had just finished a new scan. The screen showed a dark shape under the Sphinx, a shape that looked like a room. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Then the lead geophysicist, Lena, pointed at the monitor and whispered, "There's a hollow. A big one." This was the shocking moment the world later talked about, a clear radar image that suggested a hidden chamber under the Great Sphinx of Giza. The Sphinx has watched the desert for thousands of years, but now it seemed to be hiding something below its paws. The team carried a small robotic camera down a narrow borehole they had carefully drilled. The camera's light flashed into darkness and then caught the edge of stone, a carved lintel, smooth and strange in the glow. The screen filled with an opening into a room no one had seen before. A hush fell over the scientists. They stared at the black box of the camera feed, feeling the weight of 4,000 years pressing down on that tiny view. ResearchGate +1. Then the feed cracked to static. A faint wind blew across the desert and raised dust. One of the team members swallowed hard. "Is that a sound?" he asked. From deep in the hole came a whispering echo, not human words but the soft ringing of something hollow, like a bell far away. The screen fluttered, and the camera's light flickered. The team backed up. That last clear image, a carved stone face at the threshold and something dark beyond, stayed in their heads like a question mark. The Sphinx had hidden a chamber, and whatever lay inside had waited in total silence for a very long time. To understand how this quiet, loud moment could happen, we must go back to the slow work of looking and listening. For many years, researchers have used tools that see beneath the ground without digging. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic studies, and careful geological surveys have been used by archaeologists and scientists on the Giza Plateau. These tools can show where the rock is different or where empty space might be. They do not prove treasure, but they can reveal places worth checking. Over time, different surveys found hints and shadows under the Sphinx and nearby areas. Some found signs of cavities. Others found regular bedrock and old quarry cuts. The results were never one clear story. Yet the idea of hidden rooms kept coming back in reports and in people's minds. ResearchGate +1. Some of the stories people tell about the Sphinx come from very old books. Long ago, writers like Herodotus wrote that there might be chambers and secrets under the sand. In the 20th century, more modern stories grew up, including the idea of a Hall of Records, a legendary library said to contain ancient books and lost knowledge. That idea has a strange history. It was popularized by a man named Edgar Cayce in the 1930s, and it mixed with many other guesses about the Sphinx in Giza. Scientists do not have proof of a magic library. Still, the Hall of Records story kept interest alive and encouraged people to look more closely at what might be under the Sphinx. Wikipedia. In the years just before the discovery, debates were loud. Some teams shared careful maps showing the Sphinx sitting on top of limestone bedrock carved from quarries. Others showed anomalies in radar images that might mean voids. The public saw headlines that promised a hidden city under the pyramids, and those stories were dramatic. But careful archaeologists reminded everyone that radar and satellite images can be tricky. They can pick up changes in soil, old digging, or even moisture that look like rooms. Some recent sensational claims used new satellite radar methods, synthetic aperture radar, SAR, and suggested large structures under the Giza Plateau. These headlines made many people excited. But top experts said those particular claims were not proven and must be checked carefully. Some scientists said the radar could not reach as deep as the claims suggested, and that the methods were not yet accepted by the archaeological community. The result was a mix of hope and caution. New York Post +1. Still, the small team under Lena used a careful plan. They combined older ground-penetrating radar with new, focused scans near the Sphinx's paws and along the enclosure walls. They asked permission from the Egyptian authorities for a minimal, respectful probe. They did not want to drill big holes or disturb the ancient stones. They only made tiny openings, just enough for a camera the thickness of a wrist. Day by day, their instruments scanned and their computers stitched the images together. At night they compared the data with maps from older studies. The results began to show a consistent pattern, a cavity under the western shoulder of the Sphinx, shaped differently from the quarry cuts around it. It looked like a chamber with straight edges, not random cracks. This was the moment when the team felt the difference between rumor and something that needed real answers. ResearchGate. People outside the dig watched and argued online. Some said the camera should be pushed in and opened wide. Others begged for caution, saying the Sphinx was priceless and that rushing could damage it. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities sent observers and asked for every step to be recorded. International experts were invited to study the scans. The debate was not just about science, it was also about respect. The Sphinx has been a part of Egypt's history for millennia. Any work around it must protect the site and keep the local community informed. The scientists knew this and worked slowly. On the morning the camera first slid through the borehole, a small crowd of local workers and a few officials stood around a shaded tent. The team fed the thin cable until the camera stopped against stone. Lena clicked a button and the video filled the screen. At first, there was only blackened smudges of dust. Then, like the eye of a shy animal, the camera light blinked and showed a smooth surface. The surface looked carved, not natural. It had a corner and an edge like a doorway. Lines of old plaster and a trace of faded paint ran along the stone. The image was shaky, but the shapes were clear. A chamber. Someone breathed in the tent and it sounded like a drum. "Can you see the lintel?" asked Omar, the local foreman, his voice small. On the screen, the camera edged forward and the light skimmed across a carved band. The band had worn symbols, not whole hieroglyphs, but marks like they once had been painted in bright colors and had faded away. A chill ran through the team. They were seeing something untouched for centuries. The camera moved inward, and the room opened up a little more in the light. It felt larger than the hole in the ground. Shadows gathered deeper inside, and the air on the screen seemed thick, as if the room itself was older than the light. Then the strange sound returned. It was so soft that many of the team could not hear it at first. On the playback, though, a faint ringing could be heard. It was not a voice. It was a low, pulsing tone, like someone tapping a stone at a steady speed. The instruments picked it up as a vibration that matched parts of the chamber's shape. Sarah, the acoustics expert, frowned at her readings. "This structure could be resonant," she said. "Certain shapes and hollows can sing back when struck. The ancient builders knew how to shape rock. They might have made chambers that respond to sound." The statement made the others quiet. If the chamber had acoustic design, it could have been used for ceremonies or for something else that needed sound to work. Maybe it was for prayers. Maybe it was for storage. They did not know yet. Word of the camera's image reached the press. Headlines called the find the Hall of Records or the Sphinx's secret library. People imagined old scrolls, golden tablets, or even alien technology. But the team kept saying the same thing in careful tones. The camera had shown a chamber, yes, but it had not shown books or treasures. It had shown a carved space that could be a room from long ago. The difference between a chamber and the Hall of Records mattered. The Hall of Records is a legendary idea that grew from many stories, including some from the early 1900s. Those tales were not scientific proof. The team wanted to follow science and not wishful thinking. Wikipedia. Still, the discovery felt like a door opening in a quiet house. The team spent the next days studying the images, cleaning new tiny boreholes, and bringing in more specialists, a geologist, an acoustician, a conservator who knows how to protect old paint and plaster. Each new expert brought new questions. The geologist pointed out how the Sphinx sits where the limestone was carved as a quarry. The rock had many layers and pockets. Some pockets are natural and some are cut by people long ago. The conservator warned that the camera light could damage faded pigments if used too long. The acoustician said the sound might be natural or might be caused by wind entering a different pocket under the ground. Piecing it together was like putting a huge puzzle on a small table. Piece by piece, they began to see a plan of the place beneath the Sphinx. isaac.uchicago.edu. At night, some workers told stories. An old man who had worked near the plateau since he was a boy sat by the tents and said the Sphinx had always been a place of strange tales. He told about people who had whispered of tunnels and carved rooms, and of priests who once worked near the Sphinx long ago. Others would laugh and say their grandfathers told stories that turned into songs. These stories did not prove anything, but they gave the team a human tie to the place. The Sphinx was not only stone, it was memory and myth and the lives of people who had lived near it for centuries. Then one late afternoon, as the sky turned the color of old paper, the team was ready to try a longer push with the camera. They would not enter the room. They would only see more of it. The camera fed its light deeper and the screen filled with more carved surfaces. The floor sloped down. A second lintel showed. And then the light fell across something that made the stomachs of the watching team drop. A shallow depression in the stone, shaped like a place to set a box, like a shelf or a niche. It was empty, but it had a pattern of grooves around it, circles that might have held round objects. The camera hovered. In the shadow of that niche, a darker shadow, the light caught a tiny bright glint. For a second the team thought it was just a spark of dust. but the glint was steady and cold like metal. "Pull it back," said Lena softly. Her voice trembled. The camera began to go back through the narrow hole. The screen went black and then showed the borehole. A gust of wind swept across the sand and the tent flapped. Outside, a car engine started and a dog barked. When the team checked the saved video frame by frame, the glint was still there, set in the stone niche like a small piece of metal left by hands that had been there long ago. The team argued. Some wanted to drill a bigger hole and get a better camera. Some wanted to bring in a tiny arm that could reach and touch. Others said no. The conservator repeated, "We must not damage the stone." The Egyptian authorities said the same. Phones buzzed with calls from journalists and the world began to wait. The images had been seen by millions online. People wondered if they were about to watch history change. On the next early morning, as a pale sun rose over the plateau, the team returned to the hole. They prepared a different test, not a new camera, but a sound test. Sarah set up a tiny speaker and a microphone. She said quietly, "If the chamber is shaped to respond to sound, we can send a tone and listen. We will not touch the stones. We will only listen." The team agreed. The tone sounded like a low bell, and they raised it very slowly. At first, nothing happened. Then the microphone showed a faint response. The chamber answered back with a matching frequency, and the little speaker's tone grew into a soft echo. The earth under their feet vibrated like a small drum. The microphone showed a spike in the signal. The sound came back louder. And then, like a far-off drum beating a new rhythm, the ground seemed to move very slightly under the Sphinx's paws. Everyone felt it, a hair-raising thrum that ran up through their shoes. The camera in the hole shook a little. The tone stopped. The echo faded. The sand on the surface settled like someone breathing out. For a tense second there was nothing but the sound of the wind. Then the microphone recorded a new, deeper tone that had not been played. It was not made by their speaker. It was a resonant sound that seemed to be coming from inside the chamber itself. The team stared at the screen. The Sphinx, which had been a solemn, still figure for thousands of years, had just answered them in a voice they did not cause. Lena reached for the recorder and her fingers were shaking. "We have to pause," she said. "Protect the site. We must tell the authorities." They closed the tent quietly and moved back. The world outside buzzed louder. The press wanted answers. Some called what they had seen proof of the Hall of Records. Others warned about rushing to judgment. Experts wrote that radar and sound tests are valuable but must be followed by slow, careful archaeology. Some claimed the chamber could be a quarry cavity or a natural pocket. Some thought it might be an old man-made room used for storage or ritual. The theories multiplied like shadows. That night, the sky was clear and the stars shone above the plateau. The team sat apart in small groups near the tents, each person turning the day's images over and over in their minds. The camera had shown a doorway and a niche with a glint. The sound test had shown the place could sing. The instruments had suggested a hollow the size of a room. The only thing they had not yet seen was what lay inside that niche. As the moon slid across the sky, a quiet fear and a bright excitement sat side by side among them. The Sphinx had answered with a sound. A chamber had shown itself in a radar image and through a small camera hole. The world wanted a story of ancient books and great treasures. The team wanted the truth. Both were dangerous in their own ways. Then, just before midnight, a small tremor passed through the plateau. It was so slight many did not notice it. But the camera cable dropped a fraction of an inch in the hole. On the saved video, the niche glint flashed once more and then, for a breath, something dark moved across the stone shelf, a shadow like a small hand or a tool falling. The camera feed froze for a single frame. In that frozen picture, backlit by the camera light, the dark shape looked like a thin, curved object, the kind a person might use to hook something out of a crack. The team watched the frozen frame for a long time. No one moved. The Sphinx lay above them, still and ancient, and under its paws a secret had just shifted. Something inside the chamber had moved after a long rest. The earth was quiet again. The desert wind sighed. The frame sat on the monitor like a question without an answer. Lena closed the laptop with care. "We stop here," she said. "We wait for daylight and for the authorities. We do not rush." But inside each person, a tiny flame of curiosity burned hotter. The camera had shown more than stone. The sound test had returned a voice. The frame had frozen a new movement inside the dark. What had moved? Who, or what, had left that glint? And was the Sphinx guarding a room that had more to it than anyone had ever guessed? The night pressed against the stones, and the Sphinx watched the sleeping camp. Below the paws, in the dark, a carved shelf held a tiny bright gleam, and something had just shifted after thousands of years. The team turned in their beds uneasy and alert, knowing that when the sun rose, everything would change.